In America, the story of organized crime is a dark tapestry woven from blood, betrayal, and a ruthless pursuit of power. Some crime families were born on American soil, forged from violent feuds and relentless ambition. Others were seeded from the old country, sailing across the ocean to spread corruption and carve a bloody path through cities nationwide. The Italian Mafia first made its mark in New Orleans, where brutal mob rule followed the lynching of Italian immigrants accused of killing Chief Hennessy, a police officer enmeshed in the very corruption he sought to control. This was the spark that ignited a wave of secretive, shadow-operating families who understood, after those violent lynchings, the power of remaining unseen. A new crime family was born, led by a man who would come to be known as one of America's most feared and brutal mob bosses. During the Prohibition era, a time when crime was as ripe for profit as the speakeasies were for gin, this man saw potential allies in Charlie Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, and other crime luminaries. He was an aristocrat of organized crime, as calculating as he was cold-blooded. When Luciano formed the Five Families of New York, he granted this man a coveted seat at the table. His name was Stefano Magaddino, but he was known in the underworld by a darker title, the Undertaker. Uttering a bad word about him, especially if you were one of his own men, was a death sentence. After the Appalachian disaster of 1957, anyone who dared to blame him for the debacle might soon find themselves sharing a grave with countless other problems he had buried. Magaddino's men were more than just killers. They were artisans of death, trusted to handle the most brutal hits with an efficiency that bordered on the grotesque. In his heyday, Stefano Magaddino could make even the notorious Roy DeMeo seem like a mere schoolboy. Known for his adaptability, he also evolved with the times. At the 1946 Havana Convention, when Luciano attempted to squash the narcotics trade, Magaddino was one of the few who agreed. Yet, as the years wore on, greed took its toll, and even the Undertaker found himself drawn into the lucrative world of drugs. This shift in Magaddino's operations only made his association with the notorious Russell Bufalino more important. Bufalino, resolute in his refusal to touch narcotics, stayed unwaveringly loyal, handling rackets for Magaddino without dipping into the narcotics underworld, setting himself up as a key player to control the Teamsters through Jimmy Hoffa. This secretive alliance was a cornerstone of American organized crime. The Buffalo Mob, under Magaddino, was one of the nation's most shadowy families. But by 1957, the disastrous Appalachian meeting had shattered their veil of secrecy, pulling them into the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. The Kennedy administration seized this opportunity, declaring an all-out war against the Mafia's dominion over American life. For those who say organized crime could never have reached the office of the president, they underestimate the depth of these ancient alliances. The Detroit Mafia was interwoven with other powerful crime families across America, especially in New York. The Louisiana Syndicate had its tendrils in countless corners, and Magaddino's Buffalo Mob, one of the oldest families in America, held connections with nearly every significant crime organization in the country. The approval needed to assassinate a president would not have required the signatures of every mafia boss, but only the nod from the most powerful families or outfits, such as Magaddino, through Bufalino, Chicago, through Giancana, New York, through Genovese, who used the Provenzano family, the Gambino family, who had been active since the 1920s, and the Louisiana Mafia, whose authority predated even Luciano's unification of the mob. As the Kennedy administration bore down, they failed to grasp how deeply these families were intertwined with the American government and foreign powers alike, their influence reaching even the shadowy corridors of the CIA. The articles you're about to delve into will illuminate the iron grip Stefano Magaddino held over large parts of America, showing you just how ancient, powerful, and ruthlessly corrupt they were. On September 18, 1958, the Courier Express Washington Bureau unveiled a shocking exposé on Buffalo's underworld, with testimony from Lieutenant Michael Amico, head of the Intelligence Bureau of the Buffalo Police Department. This report pulled back the curtain on a dark empire helmed by the elusive Don himself, Stefano Magaddino. Amico's testimony not only alleged the existence of a powerful, tightly knit crime syndicate operating with terrifying precision across Buffalo and Niagara Falls, but it also painted Magaddino as an irrefutable Lord Paramount who wielded unchecked control over everything from gambling dens and narcotics rings to political strings in the highest circles. The article traced a vast network of loyal lieutenants, enforcers, and business frontmen who made the Buffalo underworld an unstoppable force. Detailing a cast of notorious figures with criminal legacies stretching back decades, Amico revealed an empire fortified by violence, secrecy, and unwavering loyalty, reaching beyond Buffalo's borders into Toronto, Cleveland, and even New Jersey. From Magaddino's luxurious Lewiston mansion to the hidden alliances forged at the infamous Appalachian meeting, the article laid out the eerie power of a man who seemed untouchable, commanding an army of feared associates who executed his every decree. The exposé read like a blueprint of organized crime's stranglehold on the region, with the Buffalo Police Department vowing to break this sinister grip through tireless surveillance and collaboration with federal agents. The text of the testimony of Michael Amico, in charge of the Intelligence Bureau of the Buffalo Police Department, follows. Mr. Chairman and members of this committee, I am most happy and honored to be present today, to cooperate with this subcommittee, and to explain some of the activities of the various members of the underworld who are operating as part of the organized crime cartel in the Buffalo, New York area. At the outset, I would like to say that the Buffalo Police Department formed the Criminal Intelligence Bureau to combat racketeering on July 27, 1960. This bureau was charged with the important responsibility of accumulating, evaluating, and recording criminal intelligence data, and to operate complete files on the identities, residences, methods of operation, suspected criminal activities, associations, business activities, meeting places, family ties, and all other information available on organized crime. I am Lieutenant Commanding the Criminal Intelligence Bureau, which comprises the Intelligence Squad, headed by Detective Sergeant Samuel Giambrone, and the Narcotics Squad. As a result of surveillances, investigations, interrogations, and information gathered with the cooperation of various federal agencies and the District Attorney's Office in Erie County, a full picture relative to organized crime in the western New York area has been compiled. A studied evaluation of all the information compiled will lead to only one conclusion, and that is that a criminal-type organization does exist in and around the city of Buffalo. Whether it be called the Cosa Nostra or by any other name, it is manifestly apparent that it does exercise a certain degree of control over crimes such as gambling, vice, narcotics, labor racketeering, arson, and those of a similar nature. As a result of the efforts by the intelligence unit, with the cooperation of the District Attorney's Office and federal enforcement agencies, the following chart, setting forth the names, photographs, and criminal data of individuals and their suspected place of prominence in the cartel of crime, is respectfully submitted. Stefano Magaddino, alias the Boss, the Old Man, and Don Stefano, lives at 5D1-18 Dana Drive in an exclusive area of Lewiston, New York, with his wife. His luxurious home is located on a plot of land adjacent to a similarly luxurious home occupied by his daughter and son-in-law, James LaDuca, who was in attendance at the Appalachian Convention. Magaddino is the irrefutable Lord Paramount and titular head of syndicated organized crime in the Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and Toronto areas. Magaddino is known to be the Don and is in absolute control of all illegal operations in the area as pertains to organized criminal activities. No crime by members of the organization is permitted without his permission and guidance. Magaddino was arrested on August 16, 1921, as a fugitive from justice relative to a homicide at Avon, New Jersey, and turned over to the Avon, New Jersey Police Department. Informed police authorities believe Magaddino was among the visitors to the notorious Appalachian meeting on November 14, 1957. His clothes were found on the premises where the meeting was held. It has been reasonably theorized that a meeting of such magnitude with important, notorious Appalachian guests would not proceed without the presence of Magaddino, who has extensive criminal interests and influence in syndicate decisions. Before the Appalachian disclosures, Magaddino was known to wield a great deal of influence in Niagara Falls politics. In the late 1930s, Magaddino was reported to be associated with John C. Montana in the Empire State Brewery in Olean. It was during this time that Montana was regarded as a trusted lieutenant of Magaddino and second in command. This close association with the Magaddino dynasty of criminal activity in the western New York area has been further cemented by the intermarriage of the two families. Also strongly associated with Magaddino is Hermann Weinstein, who is alleged to have profited handsomely from his illegitimate transactions, including bootlegging, black market gasoline operations during World War II, and many other illicit activities. Weinstein is now regarded as a successful motel operator and owns the plush Peace Bridge Motel, which is considered a meeting place for prominent syndicate members. Since Appalachian, Magaddino has relinquished immediate control over legitimate businesses, such as Magaddino Memorial Chapel, the Power City Distributing Company of Niagara Falls, and Camellia Linen Supply Company of Buffalo. Magaddino is ostensibly considered to be in retirement from legitimate business holdings, passing on his interests directly or indirectly to members of his immediate family. Magaddino's present chief lieutenant in charge of Buffalo syndicate operations is Fred Lupo Randaccio. Randaccio indisputably controls all gambling, labor racketeering, and other illegitimate activities for the old man. Associates of Magaddino include John C. Montana, Samuel Friedman, Herman Weinstein, Roy Carlisi, Fred Randaccio, Fred Mogavero, James Zerilli, otherwise known as Joe Zerilli, the boss of Detroit, Joseph Falcone, Utica, Anthony Perna, James LaDuca, Dominic D'Agostino, Samuel Rangatore, Dominic Mantele, and Benjamin Nicoletti, the last five from Niagara Falls, and Samuel Pieri of Buffalo. John Montana, residing at 340 Star Inn Avenue, Buffalo, with his wife, was born on June 30th, 1893, in Montedore, Italy. Montana's rags to riches fame began as a messenger boy in a candy shop while attending grade school. He later associated himself with a taxicab business, which he started with just one cab. Montana continued successfully with his taxi business, gaining control of the Yellow Cab Company and the Van Dyke Taxi and Transfer Company, causing its merger in 1930 to form the largest taxi company in western New York State. Montana's virtual monopoly at preferred taxi locations, such as the Buffalo Airport, New York Central Railroad Station, and taxi stands at major hotels, led to political criticism in later years. Alongside his rapid expansion in the taxicab enterprise, Montana became engaged in city politics and was active in business and civic groups. He was strongly associated with influential political, business, and social leaders. Montana was elected as a councilman of the city of Buffalo in the years 1928 and 1930, and was appointed to other important city posts in subsequent years. In 1956, he was named Man of the Year for his civic contributions, including his recognition as a councilman, successful businessman, and his numerous contributions to charities. He also served as chairman of the Buffalo Zoning Board and consistently advocated for good government. Montana became a member, and in some instances the president, of numerous civic, fraternal, and political organizations, including the Chamber of Commerce, Elks, Buffalo Athletic Club, and Erie Downs Golf Course, to name a few. Montana appeared before the Senate Rackets Committee and testified that he had gone to Appalachia with Antonio Magaddino, an uncle of Montana's nephew by marriage. He claimed he was unaware of Magaddino's extensive criminal record, which included falsifying passports in Italy, extortion, rape, and violations of U.S. immigration law. Montana was convicted of conspiracy to obstruct justice in the U.S. federal court, which was subsequently reversed on appeal. Listing Montana's legitimate associates would resemble a who's who of Buffalo and New York State's prominent figures. His reputed underworld associates include Joseph Barbara, deceased, Stefano Magaddino, Antonio Magaddino, Fred Randaccio, James LaDuca, Roy Carlisi, Sam Pieri, Samuel Lagatuta, Samuel Friedman, Herman Weinstein, Joseph Falcone of Utica, and Joe Zerilli of Detroit. At one time, Montana was strongly associated with Joe DiCarlo, former Buffalo public enemy number 1. DiCarlo was involved in labor and union rackets and the distribution of lottery tickets in the Buffalo area. Montana has been strongly associated with Magaddino and is regarded as a trusted lieutenant, thus closely aligning himself with the Stefano Magaddino dynasty of criminal activity in the western New York area, headquartered at Niagara Falls. Since the Appalachian disclosure, however, Montana has seldom been seen in public with members of the criminal world. Federico Randaccio, also known as Fred Lupo, was born on July 1, 1907, in Palermo, Italy. At present, he resides at 562 Richmond Avenue, Buffalo. Randaccio was first arrested in 1922 as Fred Lupo for juvenile delinquency. About 2 years later, he was arrested for gambling. That same year, he was also arrested for bootlegging. In 1928, Randaccio was arrested for third-degree assault. He was arrested again in 1930 for felonious assault. And, in the latter part of that same year, he received a 10-year sentence for first-degree assault. This charge was reduced from first-degree robbery after he held up a garage proprietor. Randaccio was paroled, but returned to prison in 1938 for violating that parole. In 1956, deportation proceedings were initiated against Fred Lupo Randaccio by the Immigration and Naturalization Service. These proceedings were dismissed as Randaccio's citizenship was obtained as a result of his 6 months of service in the U.S. Army in 1945. Randaccio's business fronts are varied. A corporation called Frontier Lathers Inc. was formed with Randaccio as its president, John Camilleri as vice president, and Pat Natarelli as secretary-treasurer. This corporation lasted a brief time. Randaccio then entered into a partnership with Fred Mogavero in the cigarette vending machine enterprise under the name of Delaware Vending Company. This company attempted to take over and monopolize the predominantly Italian-American west side of Buffalo using persuasive salesmen such as John Camilleri, Pat Natarelli, and Sam Miano. Randaccio's next and current business venture is with a construction company known as Tour Ran Builders, operating out of Amherst, a suburb of Buffalo. This business was formed by Randaccio and Fred Turano. Randaccio is considered Don Stefano Magaddino's enforcer, that is the governing force in the Buffalo area, for Magaddino's criminal empire. To maintain his present position, Randaccio has surrounded himself with a corps of trusted and loyal associates, such as John Camilleri, to handle labor and union racketeering, Pat Natarelli, Joseph Fino, and Daniel Sansanese, to take care of the organization's bookmaking interests, and Stephen Canarozzo to handle the Syndicate's policy business. Although lacking formal education, Randaccio is regarded as a great organizer, with ample ability to hold the organization together in times of stress. Other associates of Randaccio include Fred Mogavero, Herman Weinstein, Stefano and Antonio Magaddino, James LaDuca, Salvatore Bonito, Paul Briandi, John Montana, Roy Carlissi of Buffalo, and Vito Agechi, Charles Cipolla, and Daniel Gasparini, all of the neighboring Canada area. Salvatore Pieri, alias Sam Pieri, and Samuel Johns, was born on January 29, 1911. He resides at 596 West Avenue, Buffalo. Pieri was first arrested for first-degree grand larceny and third-degree burglary on June 4, 1928. His next arrest came about 2 years later, in October 1930, this time for petty larceny. This indictment was later dismissed. In September 1931, Pieri received a 60-day sentence in Erie County Penitentiary for smuggling. In the early part of 1933, Pieri was again arrested for first-degree robbery and second-degree grand larceny. About a month later, both charges were dismissed. In March and May of 1935, Pieri was arrested and charged both times with consorting with known criminals. His next arrest came in January 1942, when he was charged with carrying a loaded concealed weapon and concealing an escaped prisoner. His last arrest came in May 1954, when he was arrested for violating federal narcotics laws. He received a 10-year sentence at Atlanta Federal Prison. Pieri served approximately 8 years and 4 months of his sentence, and he arrived back in Buffalo on May 7, 1963. At the present time, Pieri is unemployed and living with his daughter in Buffalo. Pieri's sister is wife of DiCarlo. Pieri has close ties with his brother John, also known as John Rye, who is serving a life sentence for murder in Ohio State Penitentiary, where he has been for the last 25 years. Pieri has a sister, Mrs. Elsie DiCarlo, who is the wife of Joe DiCarlo, formerly of Buffalo, who has been branded by a former Buffalo police commissioner as public enemy number 1. Pieri was the top man in the Buffalo area for the organization before his arrest in 1954. While in prison, Fred G. Randaccio replaced him, and is now so solidly entrenched that his removal is difficult to achieve. There is a possibility that there will be a struggle for power if Pieri attempts to regain his position as the head of the Buffalo organized criminal dynasty. His associates and co-defendants include Sylvester Poliafiaco, alias Sam Polo, Nunzio Romano, Ben Usolivich, Angelo Felicia, Anthony Desimone, Frank Consolo, Stephen Simmons, Alfred Warren, Anthony Crisci, Anthony Nasilli, Harry Riccobene, Salvatore Lazzaro, Michael Era, and Amato Bucci. He has close associations also with Salvatore Rizzo, Stefano Magaddino, Antonino Magaddino, James LaDuca, and John Montana. John Camilleri, born May 8, 1911, resides at 542 Richmond Avenue in Buffalo. Camilleri came to this country from Campobello di Licata, Genti, Italy, on May 30, 1916, at the age of 4 years. Camilleri applied for citizenship on August 10, 1942, as John Victor Camilleri. He became a citizen on March 2, 1944. Camilleri's criminal record started on August 17, 1930, with his arrest for grand larceny. Then, on June 4, 1931, he was arrested for second-degree grand larceny. On August 18, 1931, for assault with intent to kill. On June 28, 1932, for third-degree burglary, and on October 2, 1933, for extortion and first-degree robbery. On this last charge, he was sentenced to 20 years at Elmira State Prison. In recent years, Camilleri has headed the Vin James Construction Company and is reputed to handle union affairs for the mob. He also managed the Niagara Falls locals for construction on the power project and has close ties with Hod Carrier's Local 210. For a brief time, he was a third partner in Frontier Lathers, a construction light company. The other two members of this concern were Fred G. Randaccio and Pasquale Natarelli. After this company was dissolved, Camilleri showed interest in the cigarette vending machine business. This business was formed by Fred Randaccio and Fred Mogavero. The Delaware Vending Company attempted to take over and monopolize the entire Buffalo West Side cigarette vending machine business. The business was short-lived due to pressure exerted by the Buffalo Police Department's intelligence unit. He is strongly associated with Stefano Magaddino, Fred Randaccio, Daniele Sansanese, Fred Mogavero, Joseph Fino, Pasquale Nattarelli, and many others. Pasquale Nattarelli, alias Pat Titters, was born on July 9, 1910. He is now living at 60 Manchester Place, Buffalo. He is married and has previously worked as a salesman, truck driver, laborer, counterman, small businessman, and gambler. Nattarelli is an associate of Joe DiCarlo of Youngstown, Ohio and Buffalo, Fred Randaccio, also known as Fred Lupo, Salvatore Bonito, Stefano Magaddino, and Antonio Magaddino of Niagara Falls, and Roy Carlisi of Buffalo. He was picked up for at least 25 juvenile charges. Besides these, Nattarelli has been arrested for first-degree robbery, second-degree robbery, burglary, larceny, violation of parole, possession of policy slips, and contriving a lottery. Early in his career, Nattarelli worked for Joe DiCarlo. Later, he and Fred Randaccio were partners in rackets and gambling, including bookmaking, numbers of rackets, and crap games. Termed an associate of Fred Randaccio, Nattarelli is still a close friend and associate of Fred Randaccio, alleged top man in the Buffalo area, protecting the interests of the old man, Don Stefano Magaddino. Nattarelli could be classified as a first lieutenant to Randaccio, and also as one of the muscle men, with responsibilities over some of the gambling interests related to the mob. Besides Randaccio, Nattarelli is a close friend, and in the past, a business associate of John Camilleri and Stephen Canarozzo, three of the men who make up the nucleus of the underworld element in this city. Roy Carlisi was born on April 10, 1909, in Chicago. His present address is 20 Anderson Place, Buffalo, where he resides with his wife and children. At the time of his attendance at the Appalachian Convention, Carlisi was the owner of Club 97, a bar and restaurant located in Buffalo. Information received reveals that in earlier years, Carlisi owned and managed a wholesale retail clam distribution business. It is said that at the height of Carlisi's power, dispensers of clams found it wise to conduct their clam business exclusively with the Carlisi enterprise, and as such, Carlisi enjoyed a competition-free atmosphere in business. Carlisi was first arrested on December 30th, 1937, in Chicago, on a charge of violating the Internal Revenue Act, operation of a still, a charge which was later discharged. On January 4th, 1943, he has a record showing a War Department trial. No disposition is available. Carlisi's reputed associates are Stefano Magaddino, Anthony Magaddino, Fred Randaccio, Fred Mogavero, Paul Briandi, Joseph Fino, Samuel Sansanese, Salvatore Bonito, Stephen Vanarozzo, and Benedetto Spano. Carlisi is presently associated and in partnership with Glenn R. Bender, operating Buddy's chicken and fish takeout service in the city of Buffalo. Confirmed reports indicate that the business, which primarily deals in the sale of clams, is flourishing successfully and legitimately. Stephen Canarozzo, alias Flat Top, or Siki Canarozzo, age 42, is divorced and resides at 29 Danforth Place, Buffalo. He has a series of arrests dating from 1939 to 1959 for such crimes as violations of internal revenue laws, assault, disorderly conduct, gambling, and possession of dangerous weapons. In June 1959, he was wounded when a volley of shots was fired through a window at the Madison Cab Company in Buffalo. He was rushed to the hospital in critical condition from multiple bullet wounds and survived. Assailant found dead in California. His assailant, James Delmont, fled the Buffalo area but was found less than a year later in a field outside of San Bernardino, California, a victim of a gangland murder. His head had been battered with a blunt instrument. Canarosso, at the time of the shooting, declined to assist the Buffalo police in their investigation and would not disclose the identity of the shooter, adhering to the gangland code of silence. Canarozzo's last arrest was in 1959 for feloniously contriving a lottery. It is believed that his criminal specialty in recent years has been within the realm of gambling activities. Our information suggests that Canarozzo allegedly was elevated to lieutenant status in the Underworld fraternity. Steve's rise and prominence in the Underworld are attributed mainly to family ties. Stephen Canarozzo is presently a dispatcher and an official of the Madison Cab Company in Buffalo. His associates include Fred Randaccio, Pascal Natarelli, Samuel Frangimore, Bartholomew Canizzaro, Roy Carlisi, Fred Magavero, and Daniel Sansanese. Samuel Broccato, formerly of 210 Maryland Street, Buffalo, has a record of arrests dating back to 1935. He has served time for counterfeiting and has been arrested for first-degree robbery, third-degree assault, and numerous petty offences. Broccato has been strongly associated with Anthony Perna of Buffalo. At one time, these two men were believed to control the 6-for-5 money lending racket for the crime syndicate in the Buffalo area. Broccato has left the Buffalo area and is believed to be operating in the Arizona area at this time. Joseph Fino was born on March 13, 1915. He resides at 236 Pellman Place, West Seneca, New York. The police record of Fino dates back to May 12, 1931, and includes at least 20 entries, including petty larceny, burglary, armed robbery, assault with intent to kill, felonious assault, simple assault, criminal receipt of stolen property, and gambling. Fino and Sansanese are closely associated. Joe Fino is remarkably close with Daniel Sansanese. These two men are considered the arm or muscle for the local organization. Fino's primary source of income is currently derived from bookmaking. He has grown in the organization from hoodlum status to upper echelon rank, just a few steps below Fred Randaccio. His associates outside of Sansanese include Fred Randaccio, Fred Mogavero, Salvatore Bonito, Paul Briandi, and Pat Politano. Salvatore Bonito, alias George Raft, was born on March 30, 1914, in Buffalo. He is currently residing with his wife and family at 49 Antoinette Drive, Depew, New York. Salvatore Bonito has a criminal history dating back to 1928. He has been in constant trouble with the police and was adjudicated a juvenile delinquent at 14 years of age. He is a third felony offender who has served time in New York State Industrial School, Elmira Reformatory, Clinton Prison, and Attica State Prison. Bonito is reputed to be a skilled safecracker and by some is thought to be an expert with nitroglycerin. He has been involved in various crimes, including burglary, counterfeiting, and robberies, but his main interest in recent years has been organized gambling. It is believed that Bonito will revert to more serious crimes, along with his deep involvement in gambling. His associates include Thomas Calea, Fred Randaccio, Fred Mogavero, Daniel Sansanese, Michael Tascarella, Paul Briandi, Anthony Domino, Joseph Fino, David Ninos, Benedetto Spano, Arthur Weiss, James LaDuca, Peter Patricelli, Salvatore Rizzo, and Stephen Canarozzo. Bonito was first arrested on December 23, 1930, for petty larceny. The next arrest was on February 7, 1931, for third-degree burglary and second-degree grand larceny. He was sentenced to Elmira Reformatory, with the sentence suspended. On March 3, 1931, he was again arrested for third-degree burglary, convicted, but the sentence was suspended. Narcotics and Stim are dismissed. 6 months later, on September 18, 1931, He was arrested for petty larceny, which was discharged. He was again arrested on May 17, 1934, for first-degree robbery and second-degree assault. Both of these indictments were dismissed. On May 1, 1936, Bonito was arrested and turned over to federal agents for counterfeiting U.S. currency, and about a month later, on June 12, 1936, he was arrested for third-degree burglary and possession of burglary tools. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 to 10 years at Attica State Prison on November 17, 1937. Bonito was released on parole on May 20, 1942, but was arrested for vagrancy, which was dismissed. The following day, his parole was violated, and he was returned to Attica for the remainder of his sentence. He was again arrested on February 27, 1950, for attempted second-degree grand larceny. He was convicted and sentenced to serve 2 to 3 years in Attica. After his release, he was arrested in December 1960 and January 1961 for accepting horse bets and possession of bookmaking records. Salvatore Bonito has grown in stature over the years within the syndicate, from performing minor jobs and associating with low-level hoodlums to strongly associating with high-ranking members of the local crime syndicate. His duties mainly involve gambling supervision, including collecting gambling proceeds for the organization. This man is considered capable by both members of the organization and law enforcement of performing any and all criminal assignments, including serious and violent crimes. Daniel Sansanese was born on May 27, 1908, and resides at 208 Lexington Avenue, Buffalo. Sansanese was first arrested for first-degree robbery and first-degree assault on May 12, 1927. His accomplice, Dominic Naples, was killed by a police officer during the commission of this hold-up. Sansanese was sentenced to 7 to 15 years and was paroled on November 26, 1932. On November 19, 1935, he was arrested for armed robbery and possession of a dangerous weapon and was sentenced to 30 years as a second offender. He was paroled on December 23, 1944. On June 19, 1950, he was arrested in Norwich, New York, for burglary, grand larceny, and possession of burglary tools. He pleaded guilty to second-degree grand larceny and was sentenced to 2 to 5 years, and he was released after the maximum expiration on October 3, 1953. Sansanese and Fino, called feared men. While in prison, he formed a close friendship with his cellmate, Joseph Fino. Over the years after their release, these two men became known as the arm or muscle for the organization. In their younger years, they were feared both within and outside of the organization. Today, the subject is still considered the muscle man and has taken on added responsibilities in the organization's gambling operations as a troubleshooter and overseer. He has no legitimate business or front and is an inveterate gambler. The associates of Daniel Sansanese include Joseph Fino, Pascal Politano, Fred Randaccio, John Camilleri, Fred Mogavero, Roy Carlisi, Stephen Canarozzo, Paul Briandi, Salvatore Bonito, and Pascal Nattarelli. Paul Briandi resides at 37 Virgil Place, Buffalo. He was born in Buffalo on April 9, 1907. The criminal record of this man started in 1919 when he was charged with truancy at the age of 12. From this time on, his record shows at least 1 or more arrests for each succeeding year until 1925. These years account for truancy, juvenile delinquency, vagrancy, motor vehicle violations, fighting with dry agents, petty larceny, and attempted grand larceny. On February 15, 1925, he was sentenced to Elmira Reformatory for 10 years on a first-degree robbery charge, which was reduced to third-degree robbery. On March 4, 1926, he was transferred to Napanoch, where he was paroled on October 13, 1927. In 1930, the record shows 2 traffic infractions, and then again on May 6, 1931, he was arrested for third-degree assault, resulting in probation for 2 years. On August 4, 1931, he was charged with third-degree assault and fined $10. On May 25, 1933, an assault second charge was discharged. On May 17, 1933, an assault third charge was also discharged. And on September 18, 1933, an assault third charge resulted in a suspended sentence. On September 12, 1935, the charge was a violation of probation, and the sentence was probation continued. Then, on July 6, 1935, he was charged with 2460 PL and 1146 PL. These charges consisted of placing a girl in a disorderly house and living off the proceeds of her work. For this, he received a $5,000 fine and a 20-year suspended sentence. On January 13, 1942, he was arrested and charged with 974 PL policy slips. On June 3, 1947, he was arrested and charged with 1433 PL malicious mischief, which was dismissed. The last entry shows that on November 9, 1952, he was charged with 970 PL gambling. This last arrest completes his record up to this date. His present associates consist of Fred Randaccio, John Camilleri, Joseph Fino, Stephen Canarozzo, Pasquale Nattarelli, Daniele Sansanese, Pascal Politano, and many other hoodlums of lesser importance. Briandi's function appears to be confined to gambling within the organization. He is known to manage the syndicate's betting rooms and to collect the proceeds for the organization's betting operations. Anthony Perner, alias Anthony Gentile, and Lucky, was born on April 11, 1903. He resides at 246 Massachusetts Street, Buffalo. Anthony Perner has a lengthy police record with 33 arrests, including charges of rape, sodomy, kidnapping, extortion, felonious assault, counterfeiting, pimping, and consorting with known criminals. He is presently associated with the Perner Funeral Home in Buffalo, which he operates with his son, a licensed funeral director. Perner has a close association with Stefano Magaddino, Roy Carlisi, Sam Brocato, and Sam Lagatuta. Perner and Brocato have in the past been strongly associated with the 6-for-5 racket of money lending at usurious rates of interest. This combination was broken up a brief time ago because of Perner's gambling habits, and as a result, Perner's prestige suffered within the organization. At this time, it is difficult to appraise his position in the syndicate, even though he is still well regarded by Don Stefano Magaddino. Salvatore Peter Rizzo, also known as Sam Rizzo, was born on August 14, 1913 in Buffalo, and resides at 412 Vermont Street in this city. On October 10, 1942, he was arrested for gambling, for which he received a suspended sentence. On January 8, 1944, he was arrested and charged with contriving a lottery and was fined $25. On July 14, 1945, he was arrested on a warrant charging him with first-degree robbery and was not billed by a grand jury on this charge. On September 29, 1945, he was arrested for rape and sodomy and was discharged on both counts on October 16, 1945. On August 25, 1948, he was arrested for contriving a lottery and bookmaking counts at 12 Brayton Street. The lottery charge was dismissed, and he was held for probation and investigation on the bookmaking count. On October 14, 1948, he was fined $50 on this charge. On September 25, 1945, Rizzo was arrested with Salvatore Erie, a close and trusted associate. They were charged with violation of federal narcotics laws, for which Rizzo received a suspended sentence. This combination has been repeatedly described as the source of supply for narcotics dealers in Cleveland. At the time of their arrest, Erie and Rizzo, along with 16 other defendants, were charged with operating a multi-million-dollar ring with outlets in Cleveland. Pascal Politano, alias Baggy Pants, Pantaloon, and Lucky Pat, resides at 57 Days Park, Buffalo. He was born on December 21, 1922. Politano is considered to have led a charming life. He was arrested and charged with an attempted burglary of a bank in West Seneca, New York, a suburb of Buffalo. He was tried and found not guilty by a jury. About 3 years later, he was arrested for an attempted safe job. 2 of his associates were actually found cracking the safe. This time, he was indicted by a grand jury, but the charges were subsequently dismissed. Again, on June 13, 1961, he was arrested for third-degree attempted arson. On this occasion, he was found in the building with incendiary equipment ready to ignite, but he was found not guilty by a jury. To climax this charming life story, he was shot 5 times at a range of about 3 feet. He went to the hospital and was released about 2 weeks later with no ill effects. Lucky Pat was the manager of a tavern owned by his mother. This was a den of iniquity where suspected hold-up men, burglars, pimps, and gamblers frequently gathered. Politano is considered a tipster, that is, he cases and plans lucrative burglaries for a commission. His modus operandi involves driving burglars to the crime scene and then circling the area to warn them if police are nearby. Still protected by syndicate silence. Politano was strongly associated with Fred and Frank Aquino, as well as Vincent Santangelo and Anthony Palestine, all of whom were murdered. Pat Politano was shot by Vincent Santangelo's brother Pascal, who is now serving time in Attica State Prison for the shooting. Politano's associates include Joe Fino, Danny Sansanese, Pat Natarelli, Fred Randaccio, Paul Briandi, Salvatore Bonito, and other hoodlums of lesser stature. He appears to be in the lower echelons of the organization, but still falls under their protective cloak of silence. Samuel Lagatuta was born in Italy on April 7, 1899, and resides at 555 Lafayette Avenue, Buffalo. Lagatuta has a police record showing 32 arrests for crimes such as carrying concealed weapons, arson, suspicion of murder, and gambling. Lagatuta was considered a low-status hoodlum until the infamous meeting at the home of Joseph Barbara at Appalachian, New York. This skyrocketed his reputation in underworld circles. Lagatuta lists his occupation as a house painter. However, official records reveal no basis for this claim. He was strongly associated with the older hoodlum elements, such as Sam Lavullo, S. Lumento, and Angelo Perna. Lavullo, who is now deceased, was considered an enforcer for the organization. Lagatuta, along with Lavullo and Lumento, were all arrested in 1937 on suspicion of murder when they were found with a .38 caliber revolver in the glove compartment of their car. Salvatore Miano, alias Sam, was born on December 26, 1918. He is now living at 1753 Hertel Avenue, Buffalo. Sam Miano's police record shows 13 entries for various crimes and infractions, including burglary, first-degree robbery, threatening a complainant, violation of OPA gas rationing laws, unlawful transportation of tires, and numerous traffic violations. Miano is presently associated with a seemingly legitimate business known as the Metro Paving Contractors. Underworld ties. Given mention. His numerous underworld associates include Fred Randaccio, John Camilleri, Roy Carlisi, Salvatore Rizzo, Salvatore Bonito, and Paul Briandi, to name a few. He is reputed to be a muscle man within the organization and is suspected to be destined for advancement within the organization. He is presently known to engage in assignments involving strong-arm measures, especially in the field of labor racketeering. Michael Tascarella, also known as Torch and Mike Torch, was born in Buffalo on February 7, 1921. He was first arrested in Buffalo on December 12, 1944, for accepting bets on horse races. He paid a $25 fine and returned to booking horses in a more cautious and lucrative manner. He was next arrested for burglary and second-degree grand larceny on May 23, 1948. These charges were later dismissed. Tascarella was again arrested on December 18, 1949, for third-degree burglary. He was convicted of attempted grand larceny on February 27, 1950, and sentenced to 1 year and 3 months to 2 years and 9 months in Attica State Prison. Investigation of this burglary. An investigation of this burglary disclosed that his accomplices were Salvatore Bonito, Arthur Weiss, David Ninos, and Anthony Domino. A large arsenal was confiscated, including a .45 caliber Army automatic, 3 other revolvers, burglary tools, and nitroglycerin. While out on appeal for this conviction, he was again arrested on July 26, 1950, and charged under federal law with conspiracy to counterfeit. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in the Allenwood, Pennsylvania federal prison camp. After his release from Allenwood, Tascarella was next arrested on June 5, 1962, near Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, for possession of $50,000 worth of heroin. He and Joseph Augello of 7th Street, Buffalo, were arrested by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police when they stopped their car on a farm road in a suburb of Hamilton. He was sentenced to 14 years for this crime. Before his present confinement, Tascarella was considered a major source of narcotic distribution between Canada and Western New York, representing typical syndicate narcotic operations. Tascarella's rise in the local crime syndicate is not stellar. He was a lower echelon member, performing menial jobs for the syndicate, either for pay or favor. Antonio Magaddino, alias Nino, lives at 1528 Whitney Place, Niagara Falls, New York. He was born in Castellammare del Golfo, Italy, on June 18, 1897. He entered the United States on November 1, 1923, and was naturalized in Niagara Falls, New York, on June 21, 1948. Antonio had no criminal record in this country until the Appalachian Convention, but he was arrested in Italy on numerous occasions for various crimes. On February 29, 1916, he was fingerprinted in Ventimiglia, Italy, and charged with falsifying a passport under the name of Antonio Giovanni Magaddino, disposition unknown. He was arrested again in Ventimiglia on March 15, 1916, for clandestine activities. He was released about a month later, on April 16, 1916. His next arrest was in Castellammare del Golfo, Italy, on August 14, 1916, for homicide, but he was discharged on July 23, 1917, due to insufficient evidence. On June 19, 1928, he was denounced for robbery, rape, and extortion, allegedly committed in 1924. Specific details are not known. On January 29, 1929, he received amnesty for using a false passport from the magistrate of Trapani, and on March 1, 1930, he was released by the Trapani Tribunal Court of Appeals for traveling without a passport. The only criminal record in the United States came from his attendance at the Appalachian Convention, when he was sought on a warrant for obstruction of justice. He surrendered to United States Marshals, though this case was later reversed on appeal. Antonio is vice president of the Magaddino Memorial Chapel, located in Niagara Falls, New York. He is the brother of Stefano Magaddino, and on some occasions he represents his brother at Underworld meetings. Governed Brothers Dynasty in Buffalo. His associates include Dominic D'Austin, Sam Rangatore, both of Niagara Falls, New York, Roy Carlisi, Fred Randaccio, John Camilleri, Pat Natarelli and John C. Montana of Buffalo, as well as Willie Moore and Paul Palmieri of New Jersey. Before the Appalachian conclave, Antonio was regularly seen in Buffalo nightclubs, where prominent hoodlums would congregate. He governed his brother's Buffalo dynasty through his constant presence. James LaDuca of 5114. Dana Drive, Lewiston, New York, was born in Buffalo on October 19, 1912. He is married and has 2 children, Joanne and John. His wife, the former Angeline Carmela Magaddino, is the daughter of Stefano Magaddino, reputed to be the #1 man in organized crime in the Buffalo-Niagara Falls area. Before his arrest at Appalachian on November 14, 1957, LaDuca had no criminal record, but associated with members of organized crime. In 1939, he drove a taxicab for the Van Dyke Taxi Company, owned by John C. Montana, another Appalachian delegate. At one time he was secretary and treasurer of the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union in Buffalo, and secretary and treasurer of the Magaddino Memorial Chapel, Inc. of Niagara Falls. He is alleged to have had a concealed interest in Charles Distributing Company, former holder of a wholesale beer license in Niagara Falls, through his wife, Angelina. LaDuca is known to have associated with Stefano Magaddino, his father-in-law, Willie Moore, Paul Palmieri, New Jersey hoodlums, Joe DiCarlo of Youngstown, Ohio, and Buffalo, New York, formerly Buffalo Public Enemy #1, and John C. Montana. At the time of his arrest outside Appalachian, he was in a car with John Scalish of Cleveland and John DeMarco of Shaker Heights, Ohio. While in New York City, just before the Appalachian meeting, LaDuca placed numerous calls to Joseph Falcone, leader of the Utica, New York underworld. On May 21, 1959, federal agents launched a nationwide manhunt for LaDuca and Anthony Magaddino. A sealed indictment charging conspiracy to obstruct federal narcotics and labor racketeering investigations was returned by a federal grand jury in New York City on May 13, 1959. The indictment accused all 27 delegates of giving false, fictitious, and evasive testimony about the Appalachian meeting, tried on charges of TH law violation. On Tuesday, January 22, 1962, LaDuca and Issy Morgenstern of Rochester, New York, former president of the Richford Hotel in Buffalo, went on trial in federal court on charges of violating the Taft-Hartley law. LaDuca was accused of receiving, and Morgenstern of paying, $10,833 over a period from November 1, 1955 to December 27, 1957, while LaDuca was an officer of a union representing employees of the hotel. The indictment was returned in January 1959, while LaDuca was hiding from federal authorities. The Taft-Hartley case, before federal Judge Burke, involved charges that LaDuca received $433.33 a month from Morgenstern during the 2 years he was financial secretary-treasurer of Local 66 hotel and restaurant employees. LaDuca was ultimately acquitted of this charge. On February 20, 1961, the indictment charging LaDuca with conspiracy to obstruct justice was dismissed in the United States District Court, New York City. In this vivid article from Gannett News Service in 1968, the journalist takes readers to the serene suburban enclave of Lewiston, New York, where the seemingly idyllic Magaddino compound stands, a cluster of well-kept homes that host Stefano Magaddino's close-knit family. Here, where lush lawns and tidy maple trees evoke a world of upper-middle-class affluence, the patriarch lives quietly with his daughters and grandchildren. But the tranquility of this picturesque street shatters when flashing police lights illuminate the dark, and government agents swarm the compound accusing Magaddino of masterminding an international criminal empire. This article captures the jarring contrast between Magaddino's outward life as a family man and his alleged role as a feared don in the American Mafia, connected to La Cosa Nostra's darkest dealings. As federal agents unearth his decades-old secrets, they expose the intricate web of crime, influence, and violence tied to Magaddino. From his shadowy role in narcotics trafficking to his attendance at the notorious Appalachian meeting where whispers of Mafia conspiracies erupted into the public eye, Magaddino's legacy appears inextricably bound to both worlds: the respectable father in the suburbs and the elusive, powerful figure in America's criminal underworld. The street could be any suburban road in the United States. Even now, as winter approaches, a few leaves linger on some of the maple trees that have yet to reach full maturity. The lawns are lushly green, and, like the hedges and flowerbeds, they are meticulously kept. The street sign reads Lewiston Street, and on it, Danner Drive, although some Niagara County records spell it with just one N. In the upper-middle-class aura of restrained affluence, this minor discrepancy matters little. This is one of the worlds of Stefano Magaddino, a world of a father, his 3 daughters, their husbands and grandchildren, who reside in 4 houses aligned in what federal agents refer to as the Magaddino compound. This is a neighborhood of friendly, quiet neighbors in a stretch of 24 ranch-style and split-level homes. This world was suddenly and shockingly disturbed when the intermittent red lights of state police cars flashed in the darkness as government agents descended on the compound. Here, Stefano Magaddino was formally accused of masterminding an international gambling ring. The other world of Stefano Magaddino starkly contrasts with this idyllic suburban setting, according to federal and state investigators and informants. They allege it is a world tied to gambling, narcotics, and violence, a web of dark influence that stretches across 3 states and into 2 foreign countries. For Stefano Magaddino, the aging patriarch of the clan, stands accused of being a principal leader in the organization known as La Cosa Nostra, our thing, or more bluntly, the Mafia. For more than a generation, whispers circulated about Magaddino. His daughter's weddings in Niagara Falls were lavish events, attended by prominent figures of America's underworld, including Frank Costello, the New York City gambling czar. There were occasional violent incidents, such as the bombing that claimed the life of his sister in 1936. There were persistent rumors, underlying fear, and sporadic references in national publications or insider books to this Mafia figure in Western New York. Authors of such works often misspelled his name as Magaddino. Then came Appalachian, the notorious gangland gathering uncovered by state police in 1957. This event ignited a renewed interest among federal and state investigators in the infamous conspiracy. Subsequently, a hoodlum named Joe Valachi provided the first clear view from the inside. Finally, on the afternoon of November 26, 1968, the federal government shattered the empire. Stefano Magaddino was born on the island of Sicily, in a small village called Castellamare, meaning Castle by the Sea. Authentic records do not confirm the exact date of his arrival in the United States. When applying for citizenship in the mid-1920s, he told officials he had emigrated at the age of 12, which would place his arrival around 1903. It is as if Magaddino suddenly appeared on the scene. So many are the blank spaces in his biography. Magaddino had a brother named Antonino, who was listed as a co-owner of the Palmieri and Augello funeral home when it was established sometime in the 1920s. Antonino, reputedly an aide-de-camp to Stefano, was later apprehended at the Appalachian meeting. The funeral home eventually became the Magaddino Memorial Chapel, and 2 days before Thanksgiving in 1968, it was raided by federal agents. After the end of Prohibition, Stefano and his relatives founded the Power City Distributing Company. This company distributed beer for approximately 24 years until after the Appalachian incident. During those years, and up until an army-ordered cleanup during World War II, Niagara Falls was a bustling border town, known for its electric power plants, its waterfalls, its chemical factories, and its red light districts. There is no record indicating whether Stefano was involved in the rum running of the 1920s or the vibrant nightlife of Niagara in the 1930s. "I'm in the beer business," he would respond to those who questioned him in passing, and his words were often accompanied by a steely gaze. But for a twist of fate, informant Valachi noted, Stefano might have died in 1936. On May 19th of that year, a bomb exploded at the home of Nicholas Longo, killing his wife and injuring their 3 children. The Longo house was located next door to Stefano's home, in a still tidy residential section of Niagara Falls. Mrs. Longo was Stefano's sister. Even then, there were suspicions that the bomb had been intended for Stefano. Years later, Valachi clarified the details. At that time, a war was raging among factions of Cosa Nostra, according to Valachi's testimony to Senate investigators. One faction, led by Joseph Masseria, aimed to eliminate all those with ties to Castellammare. The bomb that killed Arcangela Magaddino Longo, Valachi said, was meant for Stefano. Stefano, however, usually stayed out of the limelight. As the beer business grew and the funeral home prospered, the legends surrounding Stefano and his untouchable status, Mafia secrets, and the empire directed from Niagara Falls became more embellished. But they were only legends. The Appalachian raid changed everything. In 1957, state police raiders converged on the home of Joseph Barbara, another beer baron, capturing a group of gangland leaders and associates. This incident marked a turning point for many New York State Cosa Nostra families, who would come to trace their misfortunes back to that raid. Among those apprehended at Appalachian were Antonino Magaddino, Stefano's brother, and James V. LaDuca, one of Stefano's sons-in-law. Was Stefano at the meeting? 3 years later, State Crime Commission counsel Elliot H. Lombard stated that there was substantial grounds to believe that he had been present. Lombard further revealed that Stefano's clothes had been found in LaDuca's car. One story claimed that Stefano escaped through the woods when state troopers arrived. Another version suggests he hid in a closet and somehow avoided being discovered. A third possibility, of course, is that he was never there, although Valachi claims Stefano chose the meeting location. Whether he was there or not, the Appalachian incident spelled trouble for Stefano. It cost his family the beer business when the state liquor authority filed multiple charges against the Power City Distributing Company. James LaDuca, a former secretary-treasurer of a Buffalo union representing hotel workers, was indicted for violating the Taft-Hartley Act. He disappeared, but later returned to the area and was acquitted. Antonino also vanished for a time, reappearing only after the conspiracy convictions against others present at Appalachian were overturned. Stefano made several appearances before investigating agencies, repeatedly refusing to answer questions, citing the risk of self-incrimination. If prosecutors were unable to convict members of what they believed to be the Western New York criminal hierarchy, they were at least able to achieve the next best thing, turning the glare of publicity upon them. "They don't like publicity," an agent emphasized. In that glare stood Stefano Magaddino, who had moved from Niagara Falls to suburban Lewiston in the mid-1950s. The web around him became increasingly tangled. It involved Rochester, its police, and an ex-convict named Frank Valenti. It linked Stefano Magaddino to prominent figures in the criminal empire, including Vito Genovese. It connected his family to Joe Falcone, the Appalachian delegate from Utica, and was a subject of long-standing mob investigations. It associated him with a gang war in the New York City area that had repercussions as far as Tucson, Arizona. His name became tied to drug trafficking from overseas to the United States via Canada. Additionally, his involvement was mentioned in testimony during an Italian trial, with statements taken at the Italian consulate in New York. State crime investigators linked Rochester and Valenti to the Magaddinos 2 years prior. It is generally known, stated a report from the State Commission of Investigation, that the crime syndicate in western New York, with which Valenti has long been associated, recognizes as its head Stefano Magaddino of Niagara Falls. On May 25, 1965, the Commission reported that Valenti met with 2 Rochester detectives and 2 days later travelled to Niagara Falls. At the Magaddino Memorial Chapel, the family's opulent funeral home, Valenti met with Antonino Magaddino, Stefano's brother and a delegate to the Appalachian Convention, along with Samuel G. Rangatore, the owner of a vending machine business in Niagara Falls, who was described as a courier and consultant in the Syndicate, and other associates. Later, Valenti visited Stefano's home in suburban Lewiston, according to the Commission. Why? When Valenti returned to Rochester in the fall of 1964, his goal was to re-establish himself as the leader of Syndicate operations in that area. As a first step, he sought and obtained the approval of the Syndicate leader, Don Stefano Magaddino of Niagara Falls. The primary operation was intended to be a network of bookmakers who would pay a percentage of their profits to the Syndicate in exchange for protection that Valenti would offer. Valenti had, as it was described, a fertile and productive field in which to operate. Meanwhile, members of the Magaddino family shifted their focus to another venture, the Camellia Linen Service of Buffalo. The case of Joseph "Joe" Bananas Bonanno remains clouded in mystery, as does the role, if any, that Stefano Magaddino played in it. Bonanno disappeared in October 1964, the day before he was scheduled to appear before a New York federal grand jury investigating organized crime. During this time, government investigators linked Stefano Magaddino to Bonanno's disappearance, and his recurrent heart ailment allowed him to evade multiple grand jury appearances. Bonanno resurfaced on May 17, 1966. By then, his New York territory had reportedly been taken over by Gaspare Di Gregorio. Bonanno sought to reclaim his lost territory, and blood was shed in New York City as a result. The connections. Stefano Magaddino attended the wedding of Gaspare Di Gregorio's daughter in Huntington, Long Island, in 1965. Di Gregorio was reportedly a distant cousin. Peter J. Magaddino, Stefano's nephew and former Niagara Falls beer distributor, who fell out of favor after Appalachian, reappeared in New York amid Bonanno's attempts to regain control. Late in 1966, Peter J. Magaddino was picked up in Montreal, accompanied by Bonanno's son. In November 1967, 3 men were machine-gunned to death in a Queens restaurant, an incident linked to the ongoing Bonanno-Di Gregorio conflict. Peter A. Magaddino, Stefano's son, had his home raided last month by federal agents, who discovered a book containing addresses for Di Gregorio in Brooklyn and on Long Island. Peter J. Magaddino is now reportedly living in Tucson, working as a bodyguard for Bonanno, according to sources in Tucson. The New York gang war has reportedly ended, with Di Gregorio now in control. The Magaddino group has been linked to narcotics in recent years, although formal charges were never filed. In May 1957, federal sources alleged that a drug trafficking route ran from Toronto, Canada, across the international border to Buffalo, and from there to Rochester and other locations. This area was allegedly controlled by the Magaddino group, while Bonanno's supply came through Montreal. More details emerged from convicted drug dealer Vito Aguezzi, as related by a federal narcotics agent during an Italian trial. Aguezzi was part of a group of Italian and Italian-American individuals facing charges related to a $150 million heroin smuggling ring that operated across Italy, the United States, Canada, and France in the 1950s. Some defendants were tried in absentia, and some testimony was collected at the Italian consulate in New York City. Ultimately, all defendants were acquitted. According to Agüetti's account, as reported by federal agent Fred Selvaggi, a plan was devised to conceal heroin in the luggage of Sicilian emigrants without their knowledge. Magaddino approved the scheme and agreed to handle any jurisdictional disputes within the syndicate. Vito Agüetti then traveled to Salemi, Sicily, and in the spring of 1960 he purchased 15 kilograms of heroin. The drugs were subsequently smuggled into New York City. Later, Vito was invited by Federico Randaccio, then reputed to be the Cosa Nostra underboss in western New York, to formally join the family in July 1960. During that summer or early fall, Albert Agüetti met with Stefano Magaddino in Niagara Falls, where he was informed that all narcotics transactions within Agüetti's organization would be managed according to Magaddino's terms, with Magaddino receiving half of the profits. On October 22, 1960, Albert Agüetti was arrested. He later complained that he had not been taken care of afterward. Shortly before his trial, alongside 10 others, Albert Agüetti was found murdered. There were rumors that he had threatened to inform the organization. Vito Agüetti, now in federal prison, believes that the order for his brother's murder came from Magaddino and Randaccio. Which world is the real world of Stefano Magaddino? Investigators suggest that both worlds, suburban life and the criminal enterprise, define Magaddino. He exists in a world of love and family, yet also in a world of violence and crime. Recently, his business world has come under attack by federal prosecutors, while his private life has been disrupted by police raids, flashing red lights, and relentless investigations. Whatever unfolds next, neither of these worlds will ever be the same. The story of Ohio as a political battleground isn't complete without understanding the grip that organized crime, especially the Italian Mafia, once held over it. In the shadowed alleys and smoky backrooms of cities like Youngstown, the Mafia's influence was omnipresent, and political candidates knew that no campaign in Ohio would succeed without navigating this brutal underworld. The mob wasn't just a criminal force. It was a formidable political machine, subtly shaping local elections, judgeships, and police appointments in its favor. The state's swing voter status made it an irresistible jewel for both politicians and criminals. But beyond the electioneering and vote hustling, the Mafia's stronghold over Ohio came with deadly consequences. Consider the chilling tale of Cadillac Charlie Cavallaro, a high-stakes gambler and racketeer whose flashy lifestyle ended in a blinding explosion, leaving his car and family in ruins. This brutal act marked just one of many bombings that had come to define Ohio's murder town reputation. From the cold, calculating strategies of Russell Bufalino to Stefano Magaddino's reach from neighboring Pennsylvania, as well as Illinois, reach through Rica, Jake Guzik, and Accardo, the mob's hand stretched over every bet, every politician's handshake, and every dollar flowing through Ohio's underground economy. Their power was not only in violence, but in the unseen alliances, with politicians and public officials quietly keeping their heads down, their hands outstretched for cash rather than cuffs. To win Ohio was to woo a state balancing between democratic ideals and the iron grip of a criminal enterprise. In a place where the bug gambling racket thrived, paying out thousands in dark alleys, and where high-stakes barbet games stretched for hours in basements beneath city courthouses, the Mafia's role became a sinister puppet master. As long as Ohio remained essential to the national electoral map, so did the underworld bosses, who saw to it that votes were influenced, officials were paid, and their names went unspoken, even when bodies lined the streets. In March of 1963, America was on the cusp of seismic change. Civil rights protests filled the streets, political scandals brewed behind closed doors, and the spectre of organized crime loomed large over every facet of public life. The Mafia wasn't just a collection of criminals, it was an empire, intertwined with political power, intelligence agencies, and law enforcement. From the White House, President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, were leading an unprecedented campaign against organized crime. Robert had convinced Joe Valachi, a seasoned mobster, to turn into the state's witness, sparking the first real look into the Mafia's inner workings. A month before the televised Valachi hearings, which would expose secrets never meant to see daylight, the Saturday Evening Post released an explosive piece highlighting Ohio's murder town, Youngstown. For 20 cents, readers were given an insider's glimpse at the mob's grip on Ohio and neighboring states, from the brutal legacy of Cadillac Charlie Cavallaro to corrupt officials like Mayor Franco and Chief of Police Golden, whose alliances with crime figures like Russell Bufalino and Stefano Magaddino defined a new level of political decay. In a nation riveted by the Kennedys' war on corruption, this article was more than just a story. It was a revelation. Because Charles Cavallaro loved big showy cars, his fellow racketeers dubbed him Cadillac Charlie. But apparently his fortune was shrinking, for he now limited himself to a 1956 Ford sedan. On the morning of last November 23rd, he stood in the garage behind the two-story red brick house he shared with his wife, Helen, and their 4 children. Besides assorted gambling rackets, Cavallaro operated a legitimate business, wholesaling wine grapes to local vintners, and he owed his supplier $40,000. Shortly before noon, the chunky, bull-necked man of 60 climbed into the Ford, intending to drive downtown and pay the debt. He was accompanied by his 2 youngest children, Chucky, 12, and Tommy, 11, whom he had promised to drop off at football practice. As Cavallaro turned the ignition key, a bomb exploded, blowing the car to bits. Rushing out of the house, Mrs. Cavallaro heard Chucky screaming under a pile of smoking rubble. When police extricated him, they saw that his left hip had been torn away. They found one of Tommy's hands in the driveway and the upper part of his body in the neighbor's yard. The lower part they never recovered. The blast had also ripped Cavallaro in 2. It was the 75th bombing in or near this grimy, racket-ridden steelworkers' city since 1951. It brought the number of victims killed to 5 and the maimed to 7. Chucky Cavallaro will never again walk normally. In addition, there have been numerous threatened and attempted bombings. 9 people have been shot, 6 fatally. Who planted the bomb or pulled the trigger is, in several instances, a moral certainty. But of those 114 crimes, only 2 stands officially solved. A sardonic Youngstown writer, Home, addressed his letter Murder Town, Ohio. It reached Youngstown. The Youngstown area exemplifies the truism that rackets cannot survive without 2 basic conditions: the sanction of police and politicians and an apathetic public. Here, those conditions have combined to produce a breakdown of the democratic process. Buffoons and incompetents succeed to important civic posts. Officials hobnob openly with criminals. Arrests of racketeers are rare, convictions rarer still, and tough sentences almost unheard of. I recently roamed the Youngstown area trying to fathom the causes of its 11-year reign of terror. I talked to City Hall officials, chiefs of police, lawyers, victims of bombs and bullets, and some of the gangsters suspected of engineering the violence. No single motive can be ascribed to all the mayhem and murder. Labor strife, vendettas, juvenile vandalism account for a lot of it. But scores of the bombings reflect the perpetual conflict among rival gangs for control of the area's rackets. The numbers game, or to use the regional term, the bug, remains the most lucrative racket. You bet on a three-digit figure to be derived, through a complicated calculation, from the day's pari-mutuel totals at a given racetrack. If lucky, you collect from 400 to 700 times your bet, depending on the mathematical odds against a win. The bug appeals mainly to small investors, the working men of Slavic, Italian, or Greek extraction, who comprise the bulk of the area's population. They seldom venture more than a quarter, but with thousands of them buying bug slips, the aggregate may exceed $3 million a year, a prize the racketeers consider worth killing for. The richer gamblers favor barbut, a high-stakes, fast-action dice game, originally Turkish, adopted by the Greeks and introduced to the Steel Belt during the early waves of immigrant Greek labor. The game floats from city to city according to the available police protection, and it infects its devotees with a virulent form of gambling fever. As many as 300 players may crowd 8 deep around the felt-covered table, lingering from noon into the next day. Frequently, $5,000 to $10,000 are at stake on a single pass. The house risks nothing. For providing the facilities, regulating the play, and keeping the cops under control, it collects 10% of every dollar staked. Cavallaro owned a share of a barbet game that netted $5,000 a week. According to the Underworld grapevine, he was going to be muscled out by another racketeer. The other principal rackets, bringing in the principal spoils, total an estimated $100 million, including betting on basketball and football games, as well as boxing matches and horse races, which attract gamblers with a better developed gambling appetite. Until the Cavallaro bombing brought a special squad of FBI agents to Murder Town, thereby inspiring the racketeers to operate more discreetly, you could play the bug or hit a barbet game at several locations, including a place in the basement of the county courthouse. About 70 illegal spots covered the city and its environs in Struthers, 2 miles south, turning part of the neighboring town of Campbell, where the Crab Club also swings weight, into a hub of barbut activity. Complacent judges help perpetuate the sources of illegal profit. Few racketeers could afford to operate a cheap spot if, every time a liquor law violation was proven, the court imposed the maximum penalties, up to $1,000 fine and 6 months in jail. Since January of 1962, we reported 177 violations and arrested 280 moonshiners, the area's state liquor control investigator, James H. Barber, informed me. The usual rap was a $50 fine and 10 days jail, suspended. 5 years ago, Youngstown City Council enacted an ordinance making promotion of the bug game a felony, punishable by a jail term of up to 3 years, instead of, as heretofore, a mere misdemeanor carrying a fine. Under the ordinance, and a later similar enactment by the state legislature, there has been only one conviction to date. Neither the police department nor City Hall has a total lack of able, honorable men. But the climate of corruption is so pervasive that the average citizen, with cynical frankness, assumes all officials to be wired when you're in Youngstown. Here, says Frank Krizan, Democrat, the mayor from 1954 to 1959, the public expects you to take money. Testifying recently on the extent of local gambling operations, Traffic Sergeant Paul H. Krizan, who was chief of police under Krizan, recalled, "Several officials I knew, including policemen, were mixed up in rackets." With weary, bitter despair, I noted in many Youngstown authorities, Krizan told me, "We have the government we want. I don't care anymore what happens to the city. Let them blow it all up." The present Republican mayor, Harry Savaston, admitted to me, "I've been approached, every mayor has. But take $1, you're in their pocket. That's what they want, to own you." A mild, soft-eyed, chubby man whose previous civic experience was as court bailiff, Mayor Savaston made some curious appointments to his cabinet. For city law director he chose Russell G. Mock, an attorney with a large clientele among the underworld elite. Savaston's chief of police, 66-year-old William R. Golden, was convicted in his youth of embezzlement. Proclaiming an all-out war on crime, Chief Golden began his tenure by disbanding the 9-man vice squad and replacing it with what he named the Intelligence and Security Section, comprising 15 presumed incorruptible men. The vice squad, he explained to me, had racked up only 34 gambling arrests in a year, and he had reason to believe that some members were acting as informers for the mob. All 9, however, are still on the force as patrolmen or detectives. The head of the vice squad, George Milovich, who resigned last December, is brother to John Tar Baby Milovich, a gangster. Such an embarrassing relationship is not unique in the annals of the Youngstown Police Department. The wife of a former officer ran a bordello. 8 bombings have troubled Savaston's regime. A capsule of black powder, enough to start a fire, was hooked to Chief Golden's car but failed to ignite. Appalled by how discouraging the city's reputation must be to prospective investors and families. Thinking of settling here, several civic groups have been struggling to arouse the public to a sense of responsibility. Youngstown's 2 active leagues of women voters sponsor forums on community betterment and political morality. A recently organized committee of businessmen, clergy, service club members, and Chamber of Commerce representatives instituted a public education program. The local radio station introduces programs with an unsettling bump, followed by the slogan, "Ban the bomb in Youngstown." But as yet, no noticeable awakening has occurred, no rout of entrenched political powers. The Vindicato, Youngstown's only newspaper, which continually clamours for reform, is widely denounced for giving the city a bad name. According to the stock apologia I heard, "We're no worse than other cities. Look at Chicago." Until the Cavallaro bombing, the common reaction to gangland violence was a shrug. Let 'em knock each other off. It's no concern of us law-abiding folk. The pleas of clergymen to their parishioners to resist gambling fever and thus eliminate a major field of racketeering fell on deaf ears. As County Sheriff Ray T. Davis put it to me, "They're sporting blood people around here. They don't realize that the nickels and dimes they bet are paying for gunmen." The horror and disbelief on the Cavallaro child, murders, provided a measure of awakening. Murder Town was out of apathy. Lashes of horror and disgust flooded City Hall. Mayor Savaston flew to Washington to consult the Department of Justice. Bombings do not fall under federal jurisdiction unless the explosives are transported across state lines. But on this tenuous assumption, the FBI became involved. Under the direction of Edward A. Hargett, who heads the FBI's Cleveland office, 20 agents reinforced the 5 regularly assigned to the Youngstown area. Hargett said they would keep digging until they solved the crimes. They are still digging. They face a formidable task. First, no murder method leaves starker clues than the one that obliterated Cadillac Charlie. The minimal method was used in the 3 preceding murders of Youngstown racketeers, raising the question, where were they all perpetrated by some gang of specialized professional killers? A kind of Dynamite Inc.? Yet anybody familiar with explosives and electricity has thousands of people who might make a bomb to a car. A twist of the ignition key can time the luck or the accident of the victim, thus to detonate the charge. The victim may choose the moment of his destruction, but the killer may be hundreds of miles away. Rarely can a particle of the bomb be recovered to be analyzed. The second obstacle to hammering the FBI is that wall of silence. Among the friends and relatives of the slain racketeers, fear inspires loyalty. Few will assist information with law enforcement. In 1959, the State Bar Association disbarred Franco, and the State Supreme Court ousted him from the bench. Among the unethical practices charged, campaigning for county prosecutor while still a judge and fixing his own parking tickets. Undaunted, he filed for the Democratic mayoral nomination and won it. The main plank in his platform appealed to steelworkers. He denounced the Syndicate and the big steel interests as enemies of progress. His campaign slogan was a perennial winner, which has since brought him a penitentiary sentence. Out of 78,527 eligible Youngstown voters, 16,301 cast their ballots for Franco, who won by 6,195 votes. Joe Alexander threw a party for the mayor at the Sands and later accompanied him on a holiday jaunt to Miami and Cuba. Regularly thereafter, mayor and racketeer met for mid-morning coffee. Echoes of Governor DeSalle's gloves-off law enforcement campaign helped deprive Franco of a second term and elect Savastin. Franco then announced his campaign for Congress. That effort barely got off the ground. At present, the city's bachelor mayor of 41 leads a leisurely life with his ailing mother. In our interview, he dwelled on what he considers the community's crass materialism. "We've got technicians here, not thinkers," he complained, looking thoughtful himself. "Unless you make money, you don't count." Was he through with politics? "I never give up," he replied. At last report, he was petitioning again for the Democratic mayoral nomination. The court had ousted him from the book amidst the unclear procedural chaos, campaigning for county protection while still a judge and setting his own parking fees. Undaunted, he filed for the Democratic mayoral nomination and won it. His main platform appealed to the workforce. He denounced the dictatorship and the big steel interests. This wave of progress swept over him with fervor, even though it has since brought him a penitentiary sentence. Of the 78,527 eligible voters in Youngstown, 11,631 cast their ballots. Frank won by a margin of 6,392 votes. Joe Alexander then threw a party for the mayor at the Sands, and later accompanied him on a holiday jaunt to Miami and Cuba. Regularly thereafter, the mayor and his associates met for a midnight rendezvous. Echoes of Governor DeSalle's tirade against the powder-puff law enforcement helped deprive Frank of a second term, leading to the election of Savanta. Frank then announced his bid for Congress, an effort that barely got off the ground. At the time, the city's mayor, a 41-year-old bachelor, lived with his aging mother. In one interview, he reflected on what he considered the community's crass materialism, lamenting, "We've got technicians here, not thinkers," and observing wryly, "Unless you make money, you don't count." When asked if he was finished with politics, he replied, "I give up." At last report, he was petitioning again for the Democratic mayoral nomination. "I did not give up on making a trip to Youngstown to observe firsthand the unique workings of a city constantly under stress. The A-Lounge, one of their favorite watering holes, houses headquarters and the courthouse, all within a minute's stroll of one another. My visit coincided with a noteworthy event in court, the first conviction of a bookmaker as a felon. The defendant was Joseph, also known as Joe Naples, the younger of the Naples brothers. The previous July, the same month only Naples went up to his dynamite-scarred car, Joe had raided Joey's home and uncovered, in a hidden basement room, machine guns, stolen permit stubs, and a quantity of betting slips and bug tally sheets. The trial exposed Joey to 3 separate charges. The first for using machine guns without a license, the second for receiving stolen goods, and the third for promoting the numbers game. He was acquitted of the first, but found guilty of the second. As the third trial approached, rumors circulated that Joey would pay $1,000 for the destruction of incriminating gambling documents. The offer steadily rose, reaching $5,000 by the time of the trial, when the chief exhibits vanished from the courtroom. A police lieutenant, however, had taken photographs of the evidence. Joey's conviction resulted in a 1 to 20-year penitentiary sentence to run concurrently with an earlier 1 to 11-year sentence from a previous conviction. The judge granted a stay pending appeal, and Joey likely anticipated several more months of freedom. The A Lounge stands out as a popular spot. Though John Bomboli is the official owner, Joseph Jasper, Fats Aiello, a felon, dominates the operations. Aiello considers himself the unofficial boss, a title supposedly won from Bomboli in a barber bet rather than with cash. According to investigators, Bomboli agreed to pay Aiello $100 a week, with gradual increments up to $300, to permit him to operate the lounge. The Liquor Control Board did not hold a hearing on this violation of the liquor laws until late January. It dismissed numerous charges against Fats Aiello, although the most sensational events occurred in Warren, the area's second-largest city after Youngstown. In 1959, a former Warren patrolman, Richard Stanley, serving a 1 to 15-year term in the Ohio State Penitentiary for burglary, decided to make a statement to the Warren police. 4 years earlier, Stanley disclosed, while still a patrolman patrolling the midnight beat, a group of people from nearby cities had approached him to act as a lookout for a string of Warren robberies they were planning. Stanley's original contact and the head of the gang was Fats Aiello. The others included Ronnie Caraba, the Crab's brother Donald, Butts, Janko, Willie Napoli, and James, Jimmy Z. Zimmerman, now all alleged safecrackers. Between 1955 and the autumn of 1958, by which time Stanley had been dismissed from the force for taking part in the so-called Black Market Raid campaign, he participated in the robbery of 2 department stores, a dairy, and a state liquor store. The booty totaled approximately $60,000 in cash and goods, with Stanley's share amounting to $5,000. 3 other Warren patrolmen received $600 each for their services as tipsters and lookout men. The gang carried out their final major heist at the liquor store on the night of June 14, 1958. While Stanley kept watch outside, Napoli climbed a narrow ladder to the roof of an adjoining soft drink plant, found an open window, and climbed through. Unlocking a back door, he let Zimmerman, a skilled burglar, and Caraba inside. Aiello had masterminded the heist, but did not participate directly this time. Together, they broke through to the liquor store. Spotting the safe, Zimmerman produced a blowtorch. To avoid burning the cash inside, the crew fetched a roller wheel rack from the soft drink plant and moved the safe on it to the washroom, where Zimmerman applied the blowtorch while the others splashed water to cool it down. They pocketed $5,000. Then, passing through the hole they had made, they raided the liquor shelves, collecting about $6,000 worth of liquor. They loaded everything onto a soft drink truck and escaped into the night. A cheap spot brought the liquor at half price. 6 months later, the police caught Stanley with Zimmerman's safe-cracking tools hidden in his car and booked him for burglary. Out on bail, he received an offer from the gang. If he took the fall, they would support his wife, Doris, while he was away. He pleaded guilty. In his concluding statement, Stanley explained why he had agreed to act as the state's star witness. Doris was to receive $100 a month, but that girl's getting no money. She needs shoes. She's underweight. A grand jury indicted all the perpetrators for one or more of the robberies. Aiello was set to be tried first for the hold-up of one of the department stores. 10 days before the trial, on the morning of March 13, 1961, an anonymous caller offered Stanley $15,000 if he would not testify. Confiding in a newspaper friend later that day, Stanley remarked, "That's a lot of money, but I think I'll stay with the prosecutor." That evening, as he was alone, a knock sounded on the glass-panelled door of his apartment. A gunman fired through the glass. The first bullet struck Stanley's face, passing through and out the back of his head. The second hit his right shoulder. After a week in the hospital, he recovered and returned to testify. Given Stanley's critical injuries, the prosecution feared his testimony might lack credibility without corroboration. Unfortunately, they found none. All employees at the department store stated they could not identify the armed robber, as he wore a stocking over his face. The jury, unwilling to rely on the wounded patrolman's account alone, acquitted Aiello. The next defendant, Zimmerman, did not fare as well. In his trial, the prosecution obtained corroborating testimony from Doris Stanley. She stated that Zimmerman had given her a small amount of money to placate Stanley. The safecracker was sentenced to the penitentiary for 1 to 10 years. During the third trial, that of Ronnie Caraba, 2 jurors excused themselves after receiving threats. Moreover, a discrepancy in Stanley's testimony further shook his credibility. The jury acquitted Caraba and the others on all counts. County Prosecutor Lynn B. Griffith, Jr. chose not to proceed with the remaining indictments, though he asserted, "I believe Stanley told the essential truth." The 3 policemen Stanley had implicated were not indicted. Inspector Tests satisfied Warren's chief of police, Wesley Bush, who stated, "My boys are innocent." One of them had since been promoted to detective, while the other 2 continued as patrolmen. Stanley, paroled after 18 months, now works for the city, tending public parks and playgrounds. Until neighbors with children raised concerns, he kept 2 ferocious German Shepherd dogs as bodyguards. The only people Stanley testified against who ended up behind bars were Zimmerman and Ben Jarrell, whom a Pennsylvania court convicted for attempted burglary. Willie Napoli died of natural causes, while Ronnie Caraba is back in a sumptuous house in Struthers, attending to various gambling enterprises. Fats Aiello continues to preside grandly over the A Lounge. The nickname Fats, as I learned when I visited the place, is a misnomer, a nickname from his lively, chubby infancy. Today he cuts an elegant figure, adorned with rings and jeweled stickpins. Renowned for his clever use of wordplay, Aiello once remarked when a client's lawyer tried to ask him a question, "But he's always in contempt anyway." During my initial visit, Aiello proved stiffly uncommunicative. However, he warmed up a bit when I showed up again with Ferd Franco. "Any friend of Mayor Franco and you're okay," he said to me. As we discussed Youngstown's police, he expressed admiration for Chief Golden. "You know why?" he explained. "Because he made a mistake years ago, and so did I. Now he's straight, and I'm doing nobody any harm." "Was it true, as I heard, that he had received a dozen white roses?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm supposed to be scared, huh?" he replied, then added philosophically, "Do I look worried? What happens, happens." The A Lounge was festooned with tinsel the last time I entered. A jukebox was blaring, and 2 girls were dancing. At the bar, a girl with a platinum beehive hairstyle was chewing bubblegum between 2 men. One was John Paul, Jack the Ripper, Zentko, also known as John Long. The other, Carl, Lucky Vernas. Zentko, in his dress and manner, parodied a movie gangster with slick black hair, dark glasses, and a cold expression. Vernas handed the girl some money, muttering thickly, "Here's $2, honey. Put it in the jukebox and play a tune." Not long ago, Vernas had tried to win the Democratic nomination for City Council President, but he barely mustered more than 1,500 votes. When I left Youngstown, the Federal Bureau of Investigation team had made minimal progress toward a solution of the Cavallaro bombing. However, in their investigation they uncovered an unexpected aspect of regional racketeering and its possible links to national organized crime. Gambling activity wasn't dead, only quieter. Everyone I spoke to expect a full comeback before 1963 was extremely far along. The racketeers and the crooked politicians have no other way to exist, one agent pointed out to me. It's simple economics. Already, you could place a bug bet if you were a steady customer in Struthers, and you could still find a bar boot game. And rumours of bombings were flying thick and fast. The latest of these incidents was said to involve a supposed delivery of a dozen white roses, reportedly received by figures like Fats Aiello, Joe Alexander, and members of the Caraba Circle. The prospect inspired a good deal of dark humour among the people of Youngstown. As the barbers joked, "We'll cut your hair for $2, and for $3, we'll start your cars."